Hi everyone, NUSensei here. Today we're taking a look at the Nika Archery White Dolphin. Nika Archery also trades as Elong Outdoor. They're a Chinese company and they've sold a few different products, mostly through websites like eBay, AliExpress and so on. This is not a new model. I'm pretty sure I've seen this before. I believe Jandao also sells this riser. So as with many of the Chinese risers and bows, they're often sold elsewhere under different brandings. I'll be referring to this model as the White Dolphin just because that's what Nika Archery called it when they sent it to me. This will be available more widely under the Nika brand in the coming months. The White Dolphin is designed with the functionality of a full IOF recurve bow, so you can mount all your sights and stabilizers and use this as an entry-level to intermediate bow. The riser is a cast aluminium riser, I believe. It has a bit of a hallmark of a cheaper riser. It kind of looks like the bows you get from Junsing, Jandao or Toe Point. Very similar cutout patterns and designs. It has a slightly polished look, but as far as I can see, it's a fairly typical budget level IOF riser. I think the main appeal here right away is if you're looking for a target bow for a low price, especially with those people who prefer to buy or can only buy off eBay or Amazon, AliExpress. This particular model is black, of course, and it does have the standout feature of that multicolor tiger stripe wooden grip. It does have a nice visual appeal to it. If we check through all the standard bushings, you have the stabilizer mounts on the top, middle and bottom. They're fairly well spaced out, fairly well drilled in, so they're pretty good quality. Now if you go towards the other bushings, it looks a little different. So if we go to the sight bushings, they look okay. It's a little rough around the edges. The burger holes, again, a little rough around the edges. Some of the paint's chipped off. And if you take a look at the bushing for the clicker extension, it looks a little out of place. It's like this was added after the original production model, so it doesn't look as clean. It works, of course, but it just looks a little different. I think in general, the quality control of this riser isn't particularly high. If you look at the inside of the cutouts, you can see the seams where the cast mold ends. So like with many of these cheaper risers, it isn't the prettiest thing to look at up close, but it does look and function like a bow. There's not a whole lot else that's immediately wrong with it. I do notice that the bolts in the back of the limb bolts, again, the paint is really rough around the edges. Speaking of limb bolts, one of the immediate problems is the same problem I had with the previous Nika bow, the Nika Black Phoenix. The limb bolts come shipped loose. So the bolts are not fully tightened. There's a lot of play when it comes out of the box. Again, not a huge problem, but it does complicate the setup process because now you have to figure out the correct tiller. It doesn't come out of the box ready to shoot. You have to know that these bolts are meant to be tightened and that it may affect the tiller and the synchronization of the limbs. Again, not a huge problem. If you know what you're doing, you can fix it, but because a lot of people who buy these bows are beginners, they might not know this, and this can be a little frustrating, especially if you don't have someone to point out what's going wrong with the bow. So disappointed with the tiller bolt looseness. That really shouldn't be the case, but that's how it is. There's an interesting little discrepancy here. This bar here is normally where you would find the branding of the company. From the pictures on the Nika Archery models and the Jandao models, it does say Nika in this block here, but for some reason, my version doesn't have that branding. It's actually no branding at all on this riser, which is a little unusual. Most companies will put their brand name on the riser. This may be an early factory model without the Nika branding, but basically everyone you'll see will have the name printed on the block here. The grip is bright and colorful, I'll give it that. In terms of its shape and fit in the hand, well, it feels a little too straight, and I'll explain why. Many of the better grips or high-end grips, or even the good grips on cheap bows, will have more pronounced features, like a bigger profile. So that way you have more of a feeling as to where your hand should go, both on the palm and the thumb. This one is straight, nearly. So when you put your hand over it, you don't really get much of a feeling of the palm or any pressure on the left side. It's the right-handed model, so you don't really feel much on here. So your hand naturally comes across because there's nothing really stopping it from moving there. So it tends to lend itself to be held like this, even though it should be held more like that. There's just really nothing built up on the inside to really support that. So it's a little straight there. On the thumb side, it's actually okay. There's plenty of room here. Again, there's not much of a bulge on the outside, more so on the right, but it's not very pronounced. So that's something to keep in mind, is the grip doesn't naturally incline itself to be held in a correct target grip. Also note that the front of the riser has a bit of an edge. There's a gap between the riser and the front of the grip there. So when you put your hand around it, you feel the edge of the grip on the inside of your fingers. Now again, if you shoot with a loose grip, it's not going to be a huge problem, but if you do hold the bow, it's a little bumpy. The weight is very light. My first impression when I held the riser was it feels like one of those cheap Chinese entry-level bows, like the Toe Point R2. They're a bit too light in my opinion. It's great for beginners, by the way. You can easily grab one of these and learn to shoot with it, but that's a very light riser. Not always a good thing. Balance, well, it's quite decent. It's not very back heavy, as you can see, so that's a fairly good sign, but the weight might put off a few people. Again, many beginners like lightweights because it's easier to handle, but more experienced artists would prefer a bit more weight to it. If you do buy the riser as part of the set, you will get the chance to order limbs like this one. I'm pretty sure these are rebranded limbs. These are labeled as Nika Archery Windstorm. They're pretty colorful, white sporty limbs that look pretty decent. They look like pretty typical wood core limbs with fiberglass laminate. Otherwise, these seem like a pretty decent set of limbs for a beginner. Now, between the last scene and this scene, it's been a whole day. Reason being is that apparently the kit that was sent to me didn't have an arrow rest, and I didn't have one with me at the time, so I couldn't test it. So I had to go home, come back the next day, and now I've got an arrow rest. So that aside, my impressions after stringing the bow, it's okay. It's not particularly heavy. It's one of those average weight aluminium entry-level bows. As you can see, as of all bare bows, it is quite top heavy. So I would expect that you would have to kind of fight the bow a bit when you have it at full draw. So there'll be a bit of fatigue from getting it down. That's why people use weights and stabilizers. So this is inherently going to be a little unbalanced. It feels pretty decent. I mean, this is kind of what I expect perhaps a high-end club bow to be. You'll find metal, aluminium club bows. That's kind of what it feels like, a bit more of a deluxe model. I guess the only thing that's kind of really sticking out to me is the grip. I mentioned before that the front of the grip has a slight edge to it. So when you hold it, you can feel your finger rubbing against that edge. So it isn't the most comfortable thing to hold. And if you combine the weight and pulling it down and having your fingers along the grip, that can be a little abrasive. All right, well, first impressions count for everything. So let's see how this goes. Okay. It works. It flings the arrow out. It's about a 32-pound bow, I think, so it's okay. First impression wasn't exactly exciting. It's kind of like, it's a bow. So, yeah, I wasn't sure what I was expecting there, but definitely a bow. That's actually not bad. It works okay. The limbs work fine. It's a nice smoothness and punch to it. Definitely the limbs are what you would expect from a typical entry-level limb. So feels alright, handles fine, no problems with limbs. The riser is a fairly predictable platform. I don't expect too much of it. I don't feel any strong negatives. The bow is fairly well controlled. The grip's okay. Vibration handling's okay. I'd say this is pretty much your average entry-level bow. I know in the previous reviews I've said things like it's pretty underwhelming, or it might be what you expect a bow like this to feel like. That's kind of how I feel. It's nothing spectacular. This is just kind of that cheap entry-level beginner bow, which you can easily get online. And for the most part, it seems to handle okay. Like I said before, the grip is starting to be a bit annoying. Yeah, that edge, it kind of gets to you after a while. Yeah, it's okay. I'm grouping all right. I've got my gap right now, so I've got the reference point. It's hitting right in the middle. So it definitely passes the shooting general direction test. So nothing outwardly wrong with the bow, which I would expect. So yeah, after a while you get used to it, and you should be able to shoot okay with it. Start with some arrows on the big target. Got a reference point, bottom wheel, just below it. Nice. It's a little high. Nice. Worst shot that I set there, off to the right a bit. Let's finish on a high, get this one right in the middle. Yep, good. Overall thoughts on the Nika White Dolphin. It's a pretty decent bow. Again, this is probably what you would expect at this price range. It doesn't underperform, it doesn't feel underwhelming. It's your typical starter IOF recurve. Basically any recurve at this price range will feel the same way, so no real outstanding negatives. Again, it won't feel like a very high-end performing riser because the price is a fraction of the cost. But if you are comparing this to other bows of the price range, again, especially if you're buying online through eBay, AliExpress or Amazon, this is going to be a pretty average bow. This is going to be a pretty average bow. So overall, nothing hugely negative. A lot of the things I picked on were kind of small things. Again, the quality control was a little The quality control was a little rough in some areas for the paint job and the limbs. There are a few paint chips and so on. The grip is okay. Like I said, it's a little sharp, so it might feel uncomfortable if you wrap your hand around the riser. The other thing which I'm a little disappointed with is the looseness of the limb bolts when they're shipped to you. Again, it's easily fixed, just tighten them, but it really shouldn't be the case. I've had 2 Nika bows with loose bolts coming in, and if you're setting up for the first time, this might be confusing to you. So it'd be nice if they could ensure that things were properly screwed in. Apart from that, limbs are okay, risers are okay. The bow is okay. So overall, I'd say the bow is okay. Now, one thing I find going in favor of the White Dolphin and similar brands is that it does feel a little livelier. I've found that there was a bit more feedback when you shot this, and it may be the grip or the design of the riser, but there was a bit more going on with the shot, so it was easy to adapt and feel what you were doing. The other cheap risers I've reviewed recently, like the high bow, were a bit more plain and underwhelming. This one's a bit more lively, so I guess in some ways it's like a very, very cheap budget entry-level Hoyt kind of bow, if that makes any sense. So it has that shape, it has that feeling, compared to something which is a plainer cast magnesium or aluminium riser. On my end, this is the sort of bow I would probably keep at the club as an example of an Olympic style bow, something which is cheap and affordable. So it's a good exemplar of the sort of stuff you get at this price range, and if that's your budget and what you're looking for, then this definitely is okay. It's a good, reliable learning platform, and if this was your first bow, then you'll be pretty satisfied with it. Anyway, hope you found this interesting and helpful. Thank you for watching. This is NUSensei, and I'll see you next time.